Welcome to the latest installment of our fantastic LinkedIn Live series, How Do You Solve a Problem with Maria and Gareth. Maria, how are you doing today? Everything going well? And Merry Christmas, by the way.
Merry Christmas. You talked me into wearing tinsel.
And you hope everybody listening to this, if you're not celebrating Christmas, nevertheless, getting in the Christmas spirit with our event today. It's important. Season's greetings, everyone. Happy winter holiday, happy end of the year. We've got some Christmas presents in this event, right, Maria? We're going to be talking through some particular issues that researchers often have.
Yes, we've looked into the top 5 that we find are the more well-liked and frequently asked. And then we are giving you some pointers on how to deal with them.
Frequently asked questions from our SciTrain webinars over the course of this year. What kinds of questions have researchers asked us most often? And of course, if you're listening to this on LinkedIn, you can put a comment, you can put a chat in the question. You can give us your questions in the chat. You can put information there. You can tell us like what's happening. You can let us know like how you're doing. And we'd love to hear from you. So if you're putting any questions or any comments, do put them into the LinkedIn comments. Comment on this post. Without further ado, Christmas in mind, let's get going. Let's start solving those burning questions, those problems. And one of the most common questions of all year, Maria, what's question number 1? Hot question number 1.
How do I choose a journal? There are a lot of venues to publish the paper, and sometimes the main reason why papers get rejected is because they're out of scope for the journal that people are attempting to submit them. So it's really, really important to always read through the aims and scope of the journal, whether they accept the type of article that you're trying to publish, and read through some of the papers of the latest issues of that journal to see where the editorial direction is taking them. And also, if you know someone that has submitted to that journal before, talk to them.
Very,
Ask them
very
about their
important.
experience.
Yeah, we usually recommend in our workshops that it's a good idea to have selected a target journal before you start to write. And that's really important. I would say, would you agree with that, Maria, that selecting a target journal, or at least having a target journal in mind before you get going, putting a paper together, is a good strategy as a researcher?
Having an idea of your message and what you want to put across is very important, because that's going to dictate the types of audience that are going to read your paper. And that is what determines the journal that you're going to submit it to. So you can have a couple in mind, but always have a priority, always have a list of eventual priorities.
Absolutely, because some of the other common questions that we get asked in our workshops are around like, what should I put in the different sections? Like how much information should go into the introduction, into the methods, into the results, into the discussion. If you've got journals in mind or target journals in mind, you can answer a lot of those kinds of questions as you also think about what kind of article you're going to be writing. And that's the other really important thing, right? As we think about effective journal selection, we've made our little list here of the kinds of things that researchers think about, right, Maria? What kinds of things come to mind as a researcher when selecting a journal, when picking a journal for your next paper?
So first of all is whether the people that you want to read your paper are going to be able to read your paper. So if the journal is open access, then it's much better because everyone will have access to what you publish. And then the reputation of the journal within your field, whether it's widely cited, whether people are know and the journal and aim to be published in it. And also, not as important, but also important, the impact factor, at least whether it has an impact factor, whether it has been aggregated into the Web of Science, PubMed, whatever it is that your field most values. Also, who is on the editorial board, because those are very important jobs that give you high visibility. and allow you to establish connections that are going to be important in the future.
It's a great way to check as well if the journal that you're thinking about submitting to is potentially predatory or a little bit dodgy. If you know people or you've heard of people who are on the editorial board, it's always a good idea to write to them, give them some information about your potential submission. Maybe they'll get back to you with some comments, but that's a great way, first of all, to check that your submission might be suitable for that journal, but also, is the journal really reputable? Is it really above board? We're big advocates of open access journals. We're not big advocates of impact factor, but we're nevertheless aware of the academic realities, right, Maria?
Yeah. Sometimes it is important to just know whether the journal that you are submitting to is quoted and is scored in one of the many aggregators that now exist.
And we have these 3 rules for journal selection. Sometimes I call them the pirate code. For this event, I shall call them Santa's rules for journal selection, Santa's guidelines for journal selection. Aim high if you can. We were always taught as PhD students to try to put our publications into journals with the best reputation possible, the highest impact factor possible if we could, but nevertheless, do attend one of our SciTrain events. We'll help you with this journal selection process. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with us as well, because you can't always publish everything in the Lancet, in Nature, in Science, right, Marie? You've got to choose appropriately for your submissions.
You need to be aware of who you want to target. So if you are writing something that's very niche, that only a couple of people will ever be interested in reading fully, then put it in a paper that is appropriate to your specific field, because that will be the one where people in learned societies, where people that attend conferences or organize conferences are going to be looking at. And also, they'll probably be the ones that are going to evaluate your next grant, the subject matter experts.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. And yeah, like we're wearing Christmas hats. Thank you for the comments. If you're watching this on playback and it's not Christmas, tough luck. This is a Christmas event. Nevertheless, we're here to help. And these topics, these questions, these tips are seasonally independent. It doesn't matter what time of the year. We've put together a checklist for you here to evaluate your paper, ways in which you can check whether or not your article is suitable or not for a particular journal. We're not going to read this out in this event, but if you'd like to learn more about journal selection, do sign up for one of our SciTrain webinars. We have entire events on the difference between academic journals, what different journals are, what they mean, how to pick an effective journal for your next paper. Which brings us to our question number 2, Maria. What is hot question number 2?
So the benefits of publishing in open access journals, and this is particularly relevant in journals that have article processing charges. So you should always consider, why are you paying money to have your research published? Sometimes it is not a win-win, but it's something that if you can, you are more likely to have your research read in journals that don't also charge a subscription fee or a fee to read your paper. You want to get your ideas out there, and if you have the resources to pay to get them out there, to have your research fully open access in some journals that are hybrid, then please do that. Some journals are fully open access and are freely available to all and do not have article processing charges. So if you know of any journal that is highly reputable, aim for that.
We find that researchers are very confused often about the different kinds of journals that are out there. Basically, in our events, we talk you through all of these basic differences: traditional journals where the content is published behind a subscription paywall, it's free to publish. Those are your older journals. Those are many of the journals out there available to academics, but publishing in them may be a higher impact factor, but the content, the paper, may not be accessible to everybody. Open access, you'll get lots more citations, lots more reading, lots more opportunities for collaboration, but unfortunately, this model is funded by author fees, as Maria was just mentioning. That's the dreaded article processing charges. But if you have more questions, and Maria's just going to quickly talk us through these basic open access models, do sign up for one of our longer SciTrain training events. Maria, different open access models for publishing.
So you have open access. That means they're freely available to read. So people looking for the content will have access to it. In bronze open access, you cannot reuse the content that you're reading. So there are copyright issues, and you cannot freely reuse it. But in diamond open access, there are no costs for the readers or for the authors that want to pay in them. And that's usually because the institution or the learned society pays for those costs. In green open access, you have institutions that are really big, that have self-archiving or subject repositories. That's, for instance, when you have National Libraries of Medicine, when you have very big institutions that have access to a lot of data and to a lot of content that are self-sustained or that are sustained through donations, and they can help you with archiving whatever you're publishing for long term. And in gold open access, that's what we were talking about before. The author or funder pays, and there's immediate access to the reader.
Our favorite one is diamond open access. That's where a society is supporting a journal, publishing that journal open access, a society or a university, for example. If you're a member of that society, you can publish in that journal without any charge. So do have a look around. It's deliberately extremely confusing. The publishing industry is not really existing to help researchers, we do tend to find, but nevertheless, we're here to help. We can provide you with advice, support, and all that kind of thing. But if you do go down the open access road, which we are big fans of, as I mentioned, increase readership and citations, your Altmetric scores, those notices of your article on social media will be bigger. You'll get much greater impact and visibility. Often this means compliance with funder mandates. Many funding agencies require or specify that we should be publishing our work green or gold open access, and so on. It really is a big playing field leveler around the world. And that, those two related questions, which journal and can you explain to me about what open access publishing is, are amongst our most common questions from our SciTrain webinars. But here comes hot question number 3. Maria, what's hot question number 3?
So most of the people producing scientific content are not native English speakers. So it's they often feel like they are at a disadvantage to writing impactful, clear English. But one of the things that I should warn you is that even English speakers sometimes native English speakers don't really know that much, because academies, it's a language in itself. And there's some terminology that is very context dependent of what it is that you're saying. So for instance, in your day-to-day life, significant may not be very significant, but significant is related to stats in academic and biomedical journals.
We present lots of workshops and training on writing. We're here to help again in that particular area. Maria, I'm finding your English a bit hard to understand, but which sequence? Like, people often think that when they write an academic paper, they should do like, the king in Alice in Wonderland used to say, like, you start at the beginning and you keep on going until you get to the end and then you stop. But that's not the best way to put an academic paper together, is it? People often ask us about this, like where to start, what to do. That's why we've come up with this right order for academic article writing.
Start at the middle. So it's always good, for me, it's always good to start at the middle, because that's where the core novelty and the core message of your paper is. It's, if you're writing a research paper, it's what you did and what you found. That's what you want to say first. That's what you want to put out there first. So you write your methods, you write your results, and then you interpret your results. Then you go back through the reference list and find the references in the bibliography that is relevant to what you were saying, that proves or disproves, that contradicts or supports your claims. And then after all of that, you read it through and you try to summarize it in your abstract, and you try to come up with a title that actually represents what it is that you did.
Exactly. And if you're putting a paper together, you start with the bits that you've got ready to go. I mean, and the part of the article, the part of the research project that you've got ready first is going to be the methods section. That's always the bit, the methods and results, that you can write first, because those are the bits that you've done first. I mean, once you've completed your experiment, completed your clinical trial, worked through your piece of research, you know what your methods are. You can write up that part and your results. And we also recommend that building your results section, a great way to do this is to build it around individual figures, right, Maria? Look at those figures that you have from your piece of research.
I really enjoy the bit where I kind of draw out in a piece of paper what my article is going to be like, what each figure is going to represent, and what I'm going to say around each of them. So whenever you have um, graphs that are related, just put them together and see how they fit, what story they tell.
Really, really important. And what we encourage researchers in our workshops, and we do work with people hands-on, face-to-face, helping them to build their research papers. So if that's something that you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, I'd love to get help with help from Maria, like actually writing my paper, we encourage people to drill down into that research question. The first thing to do, to think about your message. What is the question that your paper is addressing? This sets up an expectation for the rest of the article or the grant application. You're able then to pose that question with your writing. Do it in a specific way. As Maria was saying, academic English is often a little bit different to your ordinary English, but setting up your article so that people will find it interesting and people will want to read more. And clear writing, very important, isn't it, Maria? Writing clearly, effectively, being consistent in your writing style as an academic.
Confusion is one of the things that most annoy reviewers. So whenever you're not clear of what people did or what they mean in a sentence, whenever you don't know what they're comparing, whenever you have too many this and that and it and was, then you don't know. You get lost. You're reading a big document and you're focusing on sections of it at a time. And sometimes you don't read it fully from start to end. So you want to always be clear and be specific, be concise, and tell things, call things by their names, and call out the comparisons that you did.
If you're looking for a Christmas present for somebody, maybe your research group, maybe your research team, perhaps a SciTrain webinar would be a good present for your research group, in which we take you through the process of writing effectively in English, using plain English, short sentences, no unnecessary words, familiar words. Remember, as Maria was saying before, most of your readers, most of the writers of academic papers, and therefore most of the users, most of the readers, are not native speakers. So we're going to keep the writing easy to understand, not complicated, using active voice. We did this, I did this, rather than the horrible passive third person, clear style and good punctuation. You'd agree with that, right, Maria? No, like, the beaker was placed on the Bunsen burner, no kind of weird third person.
No, because that takes away your agency as well. There's a lot of writing in the passive voice whenever you first start out, and there's culturally a lot of writing in the passive voice in Asia, for instance, because you're not prepared to put yourself up front. But that in academia, you always say we, and we is quite royal, and we have done this and we have found that, and it's good to take responsibility for the things that you have done and that you have found, because nobody else has done them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have lots of tips for writing effectively and plainly in English. Another Christmas present for you here is this slide, tips for plain English. I'm not going to read it out today, but there's lots of ways that you can be effective, communicate well in English in your writing. It's not that hard once you know the way to do it, which brings us to hot question number 4. Maria, we talked about figures before in the context of putting the results section together, but what tips do you have? I know you've looked at thousands of research papers in your extensive career. What tips are there for writing great, or creating, I should say, great figures?
Don't overcomplicate. Try to get one message across clearly. Don't use colors if you don't have to. And highlight what it is that you want people to read first. You have to put the title of the figure, the table, whatever it is, first. Spell out what you want people to take away from that, and then explain what's in your figure. Describe it. Say what's in your axis title, what you've measured, what's the unit of measurement, how long it took, what kind of comparisons or stats you've used. Make it self-contained.
A picture is worth 1,000 words, as the saying goes. This is often where you begin your research project, your research article. You've got your methods section, you've got the data, you've started to put together figures, you've started to make tables. This is where you're going to start to build the message into your research article. What's the most significant result? So as Maria was saying, what is the one thing that you want your audience to come away from reading your paper thinking about? And that's your take-home message. That has to be clear and effective in those figures, keeping it simple, of course, as well. We're very simple people. We need that simple message. We need to be able to understand what it is we're expected to gain from reading your paper, which, of course, is a very common problem for researchers. The results section, Maria, you're an expert, I know, at putting these sections together, especially for biomedical research literature. What kinds of tips do you have for putting the results section together, those figure-based components of an academic article?
Look at your data and identify patterns and identify what it is that you want to address from each of them. Whenever you're putting your figures together, think that whatever the figures say, you don't have to repeat again in the text. So in the text, you can be much broader and take a wider approach of trends that you observe and how they relate to the other data points in your story and in your experiments. Each figure is standalone, but then you can pull them back together and describe them in a way that makes sense for the reader.
Don't forget that most people, when they read academic papers, they do it on their phone or on their computer or tablet, and they download figures often separately from the main article. So they might be pulling out a figure from one of Maria's papers, pushing on that figure, reading the figure caption, and not actually reading the whole of the rest of the article. So for that reason, your figure captions are critically important. They've got to explain everything that's going on in that figure without that person having to have an understanding of what's written in the article itself. That's critical, right, Maria? When you put papers together, when you build them up, how are people going to be accessing that content, that research article content?
Yeah, and also different subjects have different kind of accepted norms for what they tell you and the way that they present the results. There are some biomedical papers that clearly say that your first results figure is to be a table of demographics, because that's the baseline. That's where you start out. That's what everything you compare it against. Um, Others are not as strict, but it is good to follow an order that people are familiar with so that you make it easier for them to understand your story.
Absolutely. It's got to be easy to understand, because people won't make it all the way through the paper to this point unless it is easy. And this brings us to the processing of the article itself. Probably one of the most common questions and issues that researchers have, like all year round, not just at Christmas, how to handle peer review effectively. We're very lucky in this event today because dear old Maria joining us, as she always does, is a peer review expert. Some top tips, Maria, on managing and handling peer review. How can it be done by researchers?
Well, some of it is being a regular, normal, respectful human being. I know that sometimes it's really hard whenever you see that the work that you've invested so much is, as you see it, being neglected, or you don't have any information from it in a long, long time. But be aware that people have their own jobs, that have their own ways of dealing with things, that they may have other impediments that you know nothing about. So be respectful, be positive, and also don't refrain from asking questions, but ask them in a way that portrays your respect for their work as well.
Be polite. Most editors
Be
are
polite.
doing other jobs as well. They're university academics, they're busy people. So where's my paper? I've waited 2 months. It's not a very effective way to communicate with an editor. I'm writing, dear editor, with the manuscript number to give them information so they can easily find your paper in the online system. I'm writing to ask if there's something I can do to speed up the process, for example. Maybe you can suggest some additional peer reviewers, great ways to engage, communicate. Don't be afraid to talk to editors. Above all, don't wait. We like to say, don't wait, communicate, get in touch with journal editors. If you end up waiting for more than 5, 6, 7 weeks for peer review comments to come back, and when you make responses to those peer review comments, as Maria's going to say in a moment, you need to be constructive and make sure that all of your evidence is there when responding to those peer review comments. Right, Maria?
Yes. So there are some things that always happen, which is whenever you first read a peer review, you say, I don't think they missed the point of my paper. They didn't understand what I was saying at all. Um, if that actually did happen, you can't really say it was their fault. It was probably your own fault for not making it clearer in the beginning. So you have to accept that and say that you will address it in some way, that you will make the language clearer, that you will clarify what you did, that you will increase, that you will detail your process. If you do not agree with what the reviewer said, just have some supporting evidence for why you do not agree. It's always important to have references that support your claims. You don't have to agree with everything because not every reviewer is going to completely, and the editors do not expect you to agree with everything, but they do expect you to engage in a discourse and in a discussion that is appropriate, that is polite, that is respectful. If you don't have data, then don't say that I don't have data. That's it. Just explain why. Explain that it's out of the scope. Explain that it's too many details. Explain that you no longer have access. Explain that the grant didn't fund those experiments.
Great point.
Explain a lot of things
Yeah, because you're going to get asked things that you just
repeatedly.
can't do by
Yeah.
peer reviewers. And, don't be aggressive, don't be like curt, but explain, as Maria was saying, like why it is that you can't do those things. There was no funding, there was no support. The editor will understand, and the editor also will understand that research is an ongoing process, but one that's broken down into individual chunks, those publications that we put out into journals. So nobody's expecting everything that you could possibly have done with your experiment or your clinical trial in this particular article. Be polite, be constructive. And as Maria was saying, if you disagree with a comment and you're going to come back with, a follow-up to that comment that you've received in peer review, you're going to need to have some citations, some supporting evidence to back that up. And so we have recommendations for how you can do this. We have entire webinars where we talk about how to manage and respond and control peer review. But just a few comments, Maria, on how this is done, effectively responding to peer review comments.
It's always good to have a point-by-point response. So for every issue that the reviewer points out, then you have a response. You should always either use a different color, a different font for your response, but always in the same document have the reviewer's comments and your response to it immediately below, so that whenever the editor reads it, he's completely clear on what it is that you said and what it is that the reviewer said, and how to compare and contrast both opinions.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Handling peer review is one of the most common questions that we get, if not the most common question that we get from researchers around the world in our events. Those were 5 common questions, the top 5 from our events this year. We are SciTrain. You can have a look at our website, scitrain.com, if you'd like to learn more about what we do, helping researchers to gain the skills that they need to write and publish effectively in English, managing the publication process, promoting for impact, and all of those great things. We are going to sign off now. Maria, any final thoughts before we sign off for Christmas? Jingle bells and all that?
Jingle bells. This is a very busy time of the year for most editors. People want to submit their papers before they go off on Christmas break. And I wish you all the luck with your recent submissions, and we'll see you again in the new year with more published papers and more knowledge.
We'll see you next year in our continuing, ongoing, never-ending series, How Do You Solve a Problem with Maria and Gareth. Have a good Christmas, everybody. Take care. See you, Maria.
Bye.